Hi folks, welcome to this week's news summary. If you're studying business or economics, then this will help you to make connections between the real world and what you're studying. Please hit subscribe, enable notifications so that you can make the most of this opportunity every week. This week we're going to be looking at the effects of rising energy prices on businesses. We're going to see how that is feeding through to consumers in terms of inflation and the effect on equality. We're going to be looking at a case study on pumpkins and how their supply is being affected by the drought this summer. And finally, a look ahead at the Bank of England's next base rate decision to see what they might be doing. This week, celebrity chef Tom Kerridge conducted an interview, and one of the topics he discussed was the effect of rising energy prices on his business and on the hospitality sector as a whole. Now, this is a great case study for business studies students. You can look at this and assess the impact of rising business costs, link it into a discussion about break-even points. How much of the rising costs will businesses be able to absorb? What effect will this have on the amount that they have to produce in order to break even and stay in business? And already we're starting to hear some kind of anecdotal evidence that businesses are simply closing down, handing back the keys to their property and saying, I can't operate or possibly make a profit with with energy prices rising as they are. In terms of economics, we can link this into the rising prices that's likely to come about for the goods and services the hospitality sector is producing. It's going to result in a contraction of demand. There's going to be knock-on effects onto the macro economy in terms of unemployment if these small and medium enterprises are failing. This leads into our next story, which is that UK food price inflation is hitting its highest level in many years. Prices in shops rose by 5.1% in August alone. The war in Ukraine is having an impact on this in terms of it's somewhere that we get a lot of our wheat from, so that's pushing prices up. The effect of this on families, on the population as a whole, is that it's increasing the cost of living and impacting our standard of living. Although prices are rising at 5.1%, fresh food inflation is rising at 10.5%, over double. And this brings up the issue of rising inequality that links into energy prices as well. Those on the lowest incomes are going to be more impacted by this because they spend a larger proportion of their income on the necessities of energy, of food. So although we can say, some people may be able to afford a rise in these prices, it's going to hit those on lower incomes much harder. It's also leading to changing patterns of demand. Consumers are already starting to switch to more discount stores. This happened in the last recession, the global financial crisis, 2008, which allowed the discount retailers Aldi and Lidl to get a foothold in the UK at the expense of Tesco, Asda, the Waitrose, the more mainstream retailers. Supermarkets are starting to see falls in sales of brands, people switching to more value own brands. And if you look at some of the marketing that supermarkets are doing on TV now, a lot of it is focused on the costs or the prices and comparing those of lower cost options, saying that you can get this meal for this amount of money. So supermarkets are changing their marketing to meet the perceived needs of their customers. The UK might also be facing a pumpkin shortage for this Halloween. This is as a result of the very dry summer that we've had, but it's a really nice case study to look at to apply your understanding of changes in supply, changes in demand, and also to consider the different price elasticities of demand and supply that can occur in a market. But for you economists out there, you might want to have a go at drawing the market diagrams for this, thinking about, what are the shifts, what are the elasticities, what are the impacts that this is going to have on quantity and price. Some supermarkets have already started to change their approach. Normally, what we get into the shops is the produce that is what it reaches a certain standards. But some retailers, Lidl and Waitrose in this example, have started to sell the less perfect fruit and veg because they're aware that the supply of the higher grade produce is lower, so they are having to accept a lower quality produce and hope that consumers will accept that. Our final area to look at today is less in terms of news, it's more in terms of what might happen in the future, and this is something that especially the A-level economists could take a look at and try and apply your not just analytical but also your evaluative skills to this, and to think, right, what should happen to the Bank of England base rate. The next MPC meeting and decision is on the 15th of September. The current data in the UK is that inflation is 10.1%, is expected to rise. Growth, moderately low growth in Q1, and we had a slight contraction in the economy in Q2. Unemployment is relatively low at 3.8%. And with those, normally we'd say, well, but we've already got the contrast of high inflation and low growth. We've got that stagflation. That already poses a problem in what the Bank of England should do. Their remit is to achieve that 2% inflation. And as we can see from the chart here, their recent actions have been to be raising interest rates relatively rapidly to try and cool off the economy and to slow down those price level rises. There are a few other things to consider here, though. Have a look ahead at what the data is to be forecast. The Bank of England itself is forecasting that the UK economy will be in a recession until 2024. Now, when we're in a recession, normally the action of the Monetary Policy Committee is to lower interest rates. So if they're forecasting the recession, should lower interest rates be something that they're looking at now rather than a little bit later, especially considering the time lag of base rate changes. They may also wish to consider the value of the pound. At the moment, the value of the pound is at historic lows against the dollar. It's now down to £1 will buy $1.15. Well, that means that our purchasing power is very low. We might expect to see an increase in our exports, and those figures have been rising recently, but not as rapidly as the figures for imports have. So again, things that you could consider and that the Bank of England will be considering. We also have to consider the actions of other economies. The European Central Bank and the United States Federal Reserve appear to be committed to raising interest rates. They're not facing inflation and low growth to the same extent that the UK is. So again, if they're raising interest rates and the UK isn't, what effect will that have on our currency in terms of flows of hot money? And we could also say what effect will our new government have in terms of investment and flows of hot money? As I'm making this video, it appears as though Liz Truss will be our new Prime Minister, but that's not confirmed yet. Her policies are going to have a lot of impact on how the rest of the world views the UK as somewhere to invest, and that could have knock-on effects onto Bank of England base rate decisions. Another thing to consider is how any changes in the Bank of England base rate might have a knock-on effect to the government debt repayments. We owe a lot from COVID and the furlough scheme and other debt that was incurred there. But it looks as though there might be more debt coming in terms of financial support for businesses and individuals for the energy crisis. and changes in bank rates are going to have an effect on that. Might the Bank of England decide that, well, the government can't afford higher interest rates? This is something that economists themselves are discussing, lots of different points of view and opinions. Should we be looking now at controlling inflation, or should we be more focused on kind of keeping the economy alive and growing in the future? No real right or wrong answer or consensus on this, but it's something that you could think about and discuss and go, what do you think the most important factors are? I hope that you've got something out of this video, that you've been able to make links between what's going on in the real world and what you're studying in your courses. Next week is likely to be a big week, with hopefully a whole new raft of policies and interventions announced by the new Prime Minister and their cabinet. So hit the subscribe button, come back next week, and see you later.